I wanted to welcome everyone to this NCA webinar on generational diversity. For those of you that weren't able to join us in Arizona last month, this subject was actually brought up by both of our guest speakers, Deborah Gardner and Michael Fazio. And we didn't plan that. It just worked out that this is becoming a hot topic in both customer service and coworker and employee-employer relationships. So we've invited Stacy Soyak here, has agreed to join us. Stacy works with TravelGuard and is the manager of our training and development team here.
Thank you, Jill, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time to hear a little bit about generational diversity. From a service provider standpoint, how do you work to ensure, From a service provider standpoint, how do you work to ensure that you're providing the best customer experience you can? How are you working to ensure that what you're doing is viewed as valuable to each person with whom you come in contact with? Currently, we find that we have 4 different generations acting as consumers, as well as 4 generations that we interact with in the workplace. Every generation has different life experiences which have helped to shape their preferences, their needs, their tendencies, their behaviors, their values, as well as their expectations that they have as consumers of either a product or service. Each generation has specific likes and dislikes as to how they are treated and being serviced. With that said, I hope that you'll find value and benefit to spending time today looking at the generational diversity. Hopefully this will help you create what we could call a generational toolbox, which will give you and others the ability to gain some insight and use that insight into how we're able to structure some of our services that we provide and gain better customer experiences through the different generations. In today's session, we're going to take a look at some of the characteristics and values that in general define the different generations. We're going to look at what makes them tick. We're going to look at how we can use those characteristics to our advantage. We'll also take a look at some other overall benefits to generational diversity, and after all this, we're going to take a quick look at what's really important and what stays the same. Okay, so to get us started, let's spend a little time looking at some of the more specific generational differences. First of all, generations are generally defined in terms of having a common sense of identity with something. Members of any given generation will typically have shared some of the same formative experiences, which usually will consist of major events of the time. This would include things such as war, tragedies, major school shootings, 9/11. It will include things such as high-profile deaths or assassinations or other events like the state of the economy at any given period of time. It could also include family dynamic changes, and not to mention, or we shouldn't forget, technology and media and how that's shaped the generation. It's with these shared cultural experiences that have a powerful and lasting impact on how the generations have been shaped. These shared values lead to what is commonly called a generational archetype, or it's their patterns of behavior, it's their generational values, it's their identity. It's what makes them who they are, who we are. So let's spend a little more time looking at some of the differences within the generations. First, let's take a look at traditionalists. Traditionalists are typically defined by including those who were born between the years 1925 and 1945. Now, if you were to go out and do research, there's multitudes of information out there on the different generations, every one of them is going to define the specific time period a little differently. There's no way to really pinpoint it, but in general, for this presentation, this is the time frame that I found most consistent. So traditionalists have mostly been shaped by the hardships they and their parents or their families experienced as the result of the Great Depression in the 30s, as well as World War II. Many of them were too young to fight in World War II, but they would remember the hardships that the families faced, both with things such as gas rationing and just simply the experience of having a family member away from the homestead. Values and characteristics of this generation include being dedicated to their jobs. This is the generation that started with an organization and ended with an organization. They were extremely hardworking. Their duty and loyalty to their jobs and employers would typically come ahead of any pleasures that they would have experienced on the home front. They had a deep level of respect for both leadership in the organization and authority outside of the organization. Respect back then was based on the position you held. So whether it was a manager in the or leadership in the organization, they respected them for that position, or authority outside, the police department. They respected the police for the position that they held. Children also learned to respect their parents for the position that they held within the family. Now, not only did this generation respect leadership and authority, but they also expected to be respected by others, especially those that were younger than them. Because of some of the hard times that they experienced growing up, traditionalists are generally going to be the thriftier of the generations. They're the ones who will save, and they're going to save it now. They're going to save in the bank accounts, and they're going to save in the cookie jars. But when they do make a purchase, they're the ones that are going to purchase with cash. Some common stereotypes that people of other generations will say about the traditionalists is that they're old-fashioned and they don't like change. Well, at some point, every generation is going to be old-fashioned, so I think that's going to be a consistent. Okay. If we take a look at some characteristics of the baby boomers are defined as those born between the years of 1946 and 1964. In the mid-1940s, which was post-World War II, the U.S. actually experienced a booming economy, which helped create a notion for the baby boomer generation that everything is possible. This helped shape their vision of hope and opportunity. It helped define for them that the sky is the limit. National broadcast TV really took off during this time, became the new medium, allowing teens of the time to see, feel, hear, and experience their identities more than ever before. For those, some may remember that sex, drugs, and rock and roll were in. It was the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Woodstock. This was also the generation, though, that began to challenge authority. They challenged it through the movements of civil rights and women's liberation. Boomers eventually grew up defining their success in life by their work accomplishments. This group defined for us the 60-hour work week. Let me personally thank them for that. Boomers believed that they paid their dues, so everyone coming up the ranks underneath them should pay their dues before earning the respect of the boomers. Spending for baby boomers became an immediate gratification. They wanted it, and they wanted it now. This is the generation that really boomed the credit card industry. They're going to buy it now and pay for it later. Some common stereotypes from other generations as they look at the baby boomer generation is that they were power-driven and self-centered. So Generation X, also known as Gen X, is defined by those born between the years of 1965 and 1980. Many Gen Xers are going to remember going through a hard time with their parents. Many parents experiencing job restructuring as companies started to transition. When the economy took a downturn in the 1970s, unemployment in the early 1980s hit an all-time high of 11%, which at that time was the highest seen since the Great Depression. This helped form two major characteristics of Gen Xers, which is uncertainty and skepticism. Gen Xers were also affected by skyrocketing divorce rates of the baby boomers, which led to single-parent families and single working parent families, which led to latchkey kids. Some will even say that it's through this latchkey kid generation that we saw an increase in unwed births, teen alcoholism, and teen smoking because the children and teens were left home alone. Some common stereotypes of this generation are that Gen Xers are slackers, selfish, and impatient. Gen Xers had to grow up learning how to rely on themselves. Being self-reliant and self-sufficient also helped lead this generation to becoming skeptical and suspicious of permanency. This is the generation that started to see the effects that nothing stays the same. Previous generations experienced loyalty to their employers. This is the first one that saw employers not being loyal to their employees. This group is also very independent as a result of being a latchkey generation. So when it comes to work, they really view themselves as, we could say, a free agent. And by that I mean that they're not necessarily committed to one employer. They don't view anything as permanent, so they're willing and able at any time to pick up and move on to the next challenge. Gen Y, also known as the millennials, are defined generally by those born between the years of 1981 and 2000, and even I would say who really understands the millennial group. Most millennials are seen as the anything goes generation. Their world is blended, and they're needing to be flexible. Parents of this generation viewed them as having great opportunities ahead of them, but they're quickly finding otherwise as we continue to experience rise in unemployment, company outsourcing, the burst of the housing bubble, and yet another recession. Millennials have been raised by doting parents who tend to all of their needs. They've received awards for just showing up. They got candy in school for turning in homework. All of this has helped to shape the Gen Y or the millennial generation to have a sense of entitlement. They have a sense of I'm owed this. They've also been raised around computers and technology. So while they weren't originally immersed in the social world, they have fully embraced it and tend to be continually connected to one another. The millennial group has great level of confidence in themselves, and they're definitely goal-orientated, but they require the integration of work and everyday life. This is the generation who's going to challenge you as an employer to meet their needs. They're the generation who's really starting to focus more on being home for the family. They're the generation who's going to say, why do I have to work that 8 to 5? There's no reason that I can't work 8 to 10 and then do the rest of my work at home. They believe that life is a cafeteria filled with choices, most of which is available to them online. Now, people in other generations will have a stereotype of this group as having a short attention span, they're spoiled, and they're way too dependent on their technology. This is the generation that you're going to find sitting in the living room watching the TV, listening to something on the headset, reading something on their iPod, and texting people all at the same time. First, let's remember that there is so much more to each individual inside these generations, but with a basic understanding, you can begin to see how the influences of the generations are at work when we talk about multi-generational consumers and multi-generational workforce. Now, with that, we can't deny that things are changing. By understanding the diversity among the different generations, you can begin to see the changes in the customer experience expectations. You have an opportunity here to look at new ways to engage not only your customer or client base, but also those you work with. And you can leverage your knowledge to begin to exceed expectations of everybody around you. So what does this all mean to you, and how can we leverage it? Let's take a look at what generations expect when it comes to customer service. Traditionalists. So traditionalists grew up buying whatever they needed from a locally owned mom and pop type store like the corner grocery store or the local hardware store. There wasn't a lot of big box stores and there wasn't a lot of malls. They were greeted and helped usually by the store owner themselves, who was of course extremely vested in making sure that the customers were happy. People knew each other with a deeper level of intimacy than we do today. Salespeople, again, generally the store owner, were extremely skilled and knowledgeable in their products and services. They were viewed as extremely ethical, fair, and courteous. Shop owners back then couldn't, in a sense, hide behind technology or use corporate policies as an excuse. In today's world, the traditionalist generation name still says it all. They're very traditional in how they view roles and responsibilities of themselves as the consumer and of the person that they're working with who's servicing them. Most traditionalists have technical abilities, but most will prefer that actual human interaction, whether it's face-to-face or by phone. The traditionalist wants to feel special, so it's very important with this generation that we work really hard to try and remember their name, but it's got to be done respectfully. So make sure that we're using the Misters, the Misses, the Ma'ams, Sirs. Also remember that they didn't have email, they didn't have texting back then. They like that personal touch. So give them the personal touch that they desire. Don't think a second thought about giving them a personalized, handwritten note of thanks or appreciation. And let's be honest, many traditionalists have lost friends, they've lost spouses, and some of them have even lost children. So a little added extra personal attention and genuine interest in them can go a really long way. Now let's also remember that traditionalists are conservative with their money. So we have to be patient with them when they're making a decision. Give them time to review information and make that decision. Don't rush them. Traditionalists don't want information thrown at them quickly. They want information presented to them in a logical format that gives them reasons to which they can formulate their decision. They're oftentimes going to also be the ones who want to sit down and talk it through with you to make sure that they're feeling like their decision is sound. So in summary, for a traditionalist, give them respect. It's important to look them in the eye. Give them time to make decisions and show personal interest in them. Boomers are commonly known as being demanding, and they're actually quite inquisitive. Remember that they've worked hard for many years and their time is valuable to them, so a sales pitch to them isn't going to be something that wins them over. To keep a boomer as a customer or a client, we need to treat them as a very special individual. They want to know that they're not just your customer, but instead they want to know that they are your favorite customer. Boomers generally like to be the center of attention. They're that first generation to have grown up with a stronger level of TV, which allowed them to really focus on themselves and their dreams. So to keep them coming back, we want to help them feel as if they are your favorite customer. It's going to be important to compliment them. Now with this generation, trends are also showing that while they're not the most technical, they do want to have the most up-to-date or the newest product or service offerings. So be sure when you're talking with somebody of the boomer generation that you're always telling them what's new or what exciting new service you're able to offer them as your favorite customer. Okay. Gen Xers. So Gen Xers are independent and they're skeptical of quite a few things. They're the latchkey generation, so learning independence at an early age has dramatically affected how they are today. Before buying any product or service, the Gen Xer is likely to do their homework, researching it before they do anything. So when they come to you asking questions, they most likely already have an answer to what they're asking you. This generation has had to play a backseat to their parents' jobs, so a lasting relationship is also very important to them. Because they have many buying years left, this generation will keep coming back if you take the time to get to know their interests, get to know their families, and get to know their circle of friends. I will tell you, though, that this can be a little challenging for some because this generation is a little more solitary and skeptical. They're less likely to open up until there's a level of trust that's already been built. This is also a very informal generation. They're not likely to value the same forms of courtesy or that the traditionalists did, so don't expect to hear them using the ma'ams or the sirs, the misters or the misses, and they really don't want to hear it either. At this point, those type of formalities are going to make them feel old, and that's not something they care for. Gen Xers have a tendency to view everyone as equal, no matter their position in society or the organization. We all put our pants on the same way. It doesn't matter to a Gen Xer the status of the person you just serviced or the one that you'll be servicing after them. One person isn't better than the other, so don't pass them up to help the person who walked in just after them. Now, right now, Gen Xers is the generation trying to juggle it all at once. They're juggling their careers, their marriages, their kids, and they're also now having to juggle some of their extended family, which makes time for them pretty tight. So when you're working with a Gen Xer or you're communicating with a Gen Xer, be efficient with them. Don't waste their time. Make sure information is easily accessible. They can either locate it easily online, they can download it easily, or this is the generation that if you have a pamphlet or information you can easily hand to them, they're the grab and go. Now, they're not always wanting to look at things on paper, so if you have things on paper, consider if you're able to scan it and send it to them, or if it's also available to them online. If it's online, it has to be easy for them to find. A Gen Xer is willing to go online, they're able to go online, they like to go online, but they don't want to spend all their time searching for things online. Now remember, because Gen Xers are skeptical, when they have questions, you have to be sure and answer those questions directly and to the point. Don't leave a perception that you might be hiding something. And Gen Y, or the millennials, this contains some of our youngest customers. Now, one thing with this generation is moms and dads actually started empowering the millennials to purchase at an early age simply by buying them whatever they wanted. They created the ask and you shall receive. Millennials are a techie generation, so they didn't grow up with social media, but they've embraced social media, and they've also started dominating the technology world. So they now are the ones who literally live online, they buy online, and they're the ones who trust whatever is published online. To appeal to this generation, you're going to have an app for that. To build the relationship with this generation, consider texting them or instant messaging them in some capacity, whether it's through LinkedIn or any of the social media sites. They're going to prefer that over face-to-face. So this generation likes to spend, especially their parents' money. If they're going to spend their parents' money, they'll spend it any which way. But if they're going to spend their money, they need to know that what they're spending their money on is not only functional to them, but has a perceived value of enhancing their image. For this generation, most of their image is actually found online. Like traditionalists, they also have a very strong loyalty. So traditionalists, we know, have a strong sense of loyalty towards their country, and they had a strong sense of loyalty towards their employers. Millennials, on the other hand, have a strong sense of loyalty towards performing civic duty and services for others. So if you offer donations to nonprofits or global causes, or if you promote global causes, make sure you promote those items to this generation. Flexibility in your style and alternatives for them to choose from is going to be essential for this generation as well. Now remember, the millennials view life as a cafeteria. They have lots of choices to choose from. They're going to try this, and then they're going to try that, and then they're still going to move on to the next thing. This generation grew up having to learn flexibility from the start. Many of them grew up having to adjust to different lifestyles in different homes. So they're going to prefer to work with people who are just as flexible as they are. This group is also an all-inclusive group, meaning they think in terms of we and us. You won't often find a millennial shopping by themselves. They're not going to go to the cell store by themselves. They're not going to go to the concierge desk at the hotel that they're staying at by themselves. Most often, they involve others in everything that they do, including the decisions that they make. They're going to get opinions from everybody around them. Now, the Gen Xers were very independent, so they made decisions on their own. But Gen Xers, some of them, tended to include their children, who are Gen Ys, in the decisions that they were making. So Gen Xers would say, we're looking at buying this house. What do you think? We're going to buy this new car. What options do you want us to have? So Gen Y has always been included in those decisions, and that's followed through. So when a Gen Y is making a decision or a millennial is making a decision, they're often going to refer back and get opinions from their parents and their friends. So as a service provider, encourage them to get opinions from others prior to making their decision. By taking advantage of every point of contact with a customer, you can begin to play a larger role in positively engaging the customers in ways that are meaningful to them. You can manage the relationship in a way that's meaningful to them and ultimately work towards other things like cross-selling, if that's applicable, or starting to tap into a new audience. But let's take a look at some other benefits that you can experience from starting to understand generational diversity. So one thing I've seen in others, and I completely recognize this in myself also, is that people believe that their way, and oftentimes is the only way and the correct way. Okay? And I'm no different. I oftentimes will say it's my way or the highway. But learning about generational diversity begins to broaden everyone's perspective. Having insight into generational diversity allows you to begin to take a step back and see things from other points of view. Everyone wants their perspective to be heard. Everybody wants their perspective to be understood, yet we're all so closed off at receiving it. We want to give it, but we have a hard time receiving it. So I challenge everybody to open yourselves up to be part of a larger solution and learning how to understand why others think and feel the way that they do. Engage everyone to be what we could call ageless, and by this I mean helping others to change their paradigm, and yourself, help yourself to change the paradigm, to see other people for who they are and not the why can't they be more like me, why can't they just text me, why do they have to call. Help others not put people in a box based on how old they are or what generation they fit in, but really help to take a step back and see they're still just a person, and here's what their tendencies are, and here's how I can help them. Progressive professionals and organizations alike work to keep learning, and that's very important. Many will accomplish this through continuously analyzing and working towards making improvements both to their internal culture of their organization, but also to their external customer experiences. And I encourage you to keep learning for yourself. You can use the information presented here today to act as a springboard to which you can take and deepen your understanding not only of your clientele but also of your coworkers. Let's not forget that we have 4 generations in the workforce, just like we have 4 generations in the marketplace. Consider spending some time doing some simple internet research on multi-generational differences. There's lots of books, there's articles, there's blogs. Go to your local bookstore, go to your library. There's ample amount of information available. But what about the option of doing something a little more interactive? Consider tapping into the live bodies of knowledge that are all around you. An idea to consider would be to partner up with somebody of another generation and start to share your thoughts back and forth on how you view that generation. Don't share your thoughts on how you view that person, but share your thoughts on how you view that generation. You could also try collaborating with others to make a list of how you see generational differences as applied to the specific clientele that you serve. Each of you know, probably in great detail, the niche market or the specific makeup of your clientele. So for an example, an elite country club is going to have a different clientele than a local public golf course. But how can you take what we've looked at today and apply that to those clients? Each of them are still going to most likely have 4 levels of generations inside of them. So how can we take what we've learned, apply it there, and start to see how we can address those generations differently to increase their customer experience? So after all this, I think there are a couple things that really still remain the same. In addition to understanding what makes us different, it's important to understand that your level of professionalism towards each person remains unchanged as it was before. You're the face and the voice of your company to the outside world. Generational diversity is really the lens through which you begin to see others, but think of professionalism as the lens through which others view you. How you communicate on every level is how you show up to them. Now, how you communicate is with your nonverbal cues, your body language, what you actually speak, and things that are in written format, whether it's email or online. Okay. The information today has really been meant to be an overview, helping you start to understand the differences between the generations, and we really encounter all of them on a daily basis. There isn't anything, though, that will take the place of equal treatment for all. Customers, coworkers, managers, and staff. Take the time to get to know each and every one of them, get to know their individual preferences. Should be a #1 priority. But hopefully with this information that you've learned today, you can use it when looking at the customer experience that you're providing to others. Remember, in all of our interactions, whether it's with your customers or your colleagues, it's about how we meet their needs and how we understand their preferences, not how they meet ours. Communication isn't about everyone communicating in our way, but it's about us learning how to communicate and service them in a way that is valuable to them.
Thank you, Stacy. And I just wanted to, we have 2 questions that are pending from online that we'll go over before we open up to the group. The first one comes from Carol. Do you think there is some blurring of generational lines due to geography, big city versus small city, rural versus urban, or even state to state or country to country?
Yes, you will see, you're going to see differences based on all of those. You're also going to see where the generational differences, you could have 2 Gen Xers and one acts more like a traditionalist and one acts more like what you typically would find in the millennial group. Those are typically going to be called cuspers, and they're born closer to either sides of it. But for the individual is shaped by those experiences. So somebody of a different class or somebody living in a different region of the U.S. are still going to have different experiences than those in others. So yes, you'll still see additional variations, and we could talk about that for days.
And the other question was from Polly. How do you educate the Gen Y or millennials as to how to work with the baby boomers?
It's really a hands-on experience. The thing that I've seen most effective is to get the 2 groups together. You can do different exercises or role plays, or even getting them together to talk about their views of the other generation. Getting generational work teams together will also be very beneficial to those groups.
And we also did a chat survey while multitasking while your presentation, and we have a pretty wide variety of people from every generation group on this call, so that is great to see.
The conference has been unmuted.
I just unmuted, so if there's any other questions, then for Stacy while we have her.
Yes, this is Tony in DC. I do have a question, Stacy. First of all, thank you very much for the great presentation. I find myself in a unique position, well, it's probably not that unique, in that I have all 4 basically all 4 generations here in the office in which I work, and I am the head of the office. I'm the head of the company, as a matter of fact. Am I expected to adjust my management style for each individual based on their generation, or should they conform to what my expectations are?
I think there has to be a little flexibility of both, and really that is a question that comes up in every organization. You'll want to sit down with each of them, understand them as individuals, but then how can each of you in your one-on-one relationships be flexible enough to meet the needs of one another? So helping them understand what your expectations are, but then how can you flex to still meet their needs also? It's all about flexibility.
I'm a boomer. I can't be flexible. Thank you.
Sure. It's one thing I've learned with my stepkids. If you call them, you're never going to get a response. But if you text them, you're going to get a response in about 30 seconds or less. I'm actually a Gen Xer, but I'm not a big texter. I'm probably more of a boomer. But I've had to flex my style away from my preferences in order to get what I need.
Right.
I think we had someone other. Jennifer, you had your hand raised?
Yes, thank you very much, Stacey and Jill, for the conference. I'm a concierge in a really big corporation, and we see clients from different aspects, and they're, of course, all different. Travelers from other parts of the world, and I don't know, when it's Americans, they see just, like we're always in the hustle bustle, and they want that extra time, and then when you give that extra time, it's like now they want you to hurry. How do you do that with the different generations?
Well, so how do you primarily communicate with them? Is it mostly on phone?
No, I see them partially part through the day, and then I do have time on the phone with my clients.
Okay. So I think once you start to have a deeper understanding of what a generation's overall preference is, you can start to flex your style to meet that, but you can't step away from what individual preferences are.
Okay.
That's never going to go away. You're always going to have, that baby boomer who is just immersed in technology, which you're typically not going to find, but you always have them that are there. You have the traditionalists that are extremely demanding and fast-moving, and then you're going to have some that are completely the opposite. And so all you can do is work the best that you can to meet their needs, but it is very fast-moving.
Okay, I'm a boomer by preference. It's really hard when you're with another boomer, and I can pretty much tell by you making out the key points what separates them. When you sit down and you spend that quality time, the other person behind is stomping their feet, and then the person that you're with, they'll say, oh, go ahead and get them. But I don't want to give up that time, but I don't want to be disrespectful in that aspect because they're like, it's just a simple question, just take care of them because I still have more questions. What would be your advice in that situation?
If they invite you to take care of another person because they have a simple question, like are you saying the person you're currently working with invites you?
The person that I'm working with, yes, someone will be behind them and they'll be stomping their feet, and they'll say, just go ahead and, because I have more questions, just go ahead and answer what they need because I'm not done. But to me, the way I grew up, it's disrespectful. You wait your turn.
Right. But if they invite you, then I would take them up on that invitation because it also then, once you eliminate that foot stomping behind you, you have a much more relaxed environment that's probably preferable to the person you're currently working with.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I think we talked about, again, understanding your audience, and I know this came up at our conference, Tony, with the person when you checked in, that your name is Tony Curtis, but you weren't that Tony Curtis, and that person had no idea what you were talking about.
Not a clue. She was like this cute little 24-year-old, and she had no idea.
Like, who?
But do we have any other questions for Stacey today?
Just remember that every experience you have does not have a one-size-fits-all solution to it.
I have a question, Stacy.
Yes, ma'am.
In the opening of the conversation, will you typically know what generation they are to better take care of them?
I can typically make some assumptions,
Okay.
but I don't like to make assumptions. I can start to formulate and make assumptions based on what I know of a typical generation, but that doesn't mean that that's what that individual's preferences are.
Okay.
So you still need to work to build a relationship and find out what those preferences are.
Okay.
Great question. Well, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time today to join us for our second NCA conference webinar. And thank you for joining, and thank you for Stacy for presenting for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
No,
you.
thank you for having us. Thank you
you.
very much for the knowledge and the information.
Absolutely.
I totally enjoyed it, and I know somebody that fits in every one of these categories. I think I have a little bit of everybody.
Nancy, I didn't see you respond to any of the categories that
I've been busy writing down everything, and I can't read it.
I would also say if anybody wants a copy of this presentation to share it, I would be open to that. And if anybody wants to have, just further open dialogue and bounce suggestions and maybe get some chat groups together, that would be a great way to start learning about the generational diversities and sharing ideas back and forth as well.
How can
And are
we,
you available for other groups? to
Absolutely.
speak to?
Absolutely.
how can we get a copy, Stacy?
you just email me, Sandy, I will get your email address with the request, and I can forward it on to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Fantastic.
Thank you. Please stand by.